Hello, 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 and welcome to this edition of the Jolly Heretic. I have such a special guest for you today, and that guest is Mr. Richard Grannon, who has many insights into psychology, and in particular narcissism and borderline personality disorder and many other things. And while I side into the old entropy, I'm going to ask Richard to introduce himself. So, Richard, over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm so glad that I can be here for the hello, hello, hello. It's one of my favourite parts of your show, Mr. Dunn. So my name is Richard Grannon. I have a YouTube channel. I was formerly a self-defense instructor on YouTube, and then I got interested in talking to people about codependency and people pleaser syndrome. And that evolved into discussing childhood trauma, CPTSD, and eventually narcissistic personality disorder, psychopathy, and borderline personality disorder, and how these relationships can play out and how to recover from being in one of these relationships, which can be a bit nasty, emotionally dysregulating and disturbing.
Okay, well, cheers, everybody. Cheers, Nimble Horse. Cheers, Dennis Menace. Cheers, Bahante. Cheers, Scapegoat. Cheers, Richard.
Cheers.
And welcome to this edition of cheers. We are, of course, an online public house that meets on Mondays and Thursdays at 7 p.m. UK time, 2 p.m. New York, in which we discuss based science and interesting research of the kind that is increasingly suppressed by our woke. Cheers, Miss Karen. By our cheers, Dodgy Do. Cheers, Zanzibar Too Far. Or Dahirs, rather, that is increasingly suppressed by our woke joke universities. And today we're going to be focusing in particular on the area which Mr. Grannon looks at, or is it Dr. Grannon? I don't know, which is the issue of narcissism. And so if you have any questions with regard to narcissism, I mean, narcissism seems to be, there's an epidemic of it at the moment, and a certain issue that's very, very politically salient to do with sport seems to have a great deal of narcissism and borderline personality going on. Hello, Maiden. Cheers. Cheers, Andrew Quinn. Andrew Quinn, by the way, is a poet here at the Jolly Heretic Public House, and he's written a poem for the occasion. He says, the trend towards rank self-obsession can lead some to bouts of depression. Mr. Grannon's polemic on this epidemic will be a most excellent session. Indeed it will, indeed it will, I think so. So it's he's very, very good. He's very, very good. Excellent. He was at the thing in Croydon. I don't know if you met him, because you were at the thing in Croydon.
I really enjoyed the talk in Croydon. It was super fun. Thank you.
Excellent. It was jolly good fun. So excellent. So cheers, everybody. So I was saying to you before the show, and of course, if you have any questions on narcissism or whatever, or borderline personality in particular for Richard, then do send them in. There's a link on the screen on the old entropy. Those questions can be sent in any time or on YouTube, and we will, of course, answer them today. Now, before I get on to what I wanted to talk to you about, what I wanted to ask you about, can you? I wanted to ask you actually when I met you in Croydon, but I was so surrounded by people that I'm afraid I didn't have time. So can you tell me? So how did you get to here? What's your background? What's your life story? How did you get into the old psychology and stuff and life training?
I think when I was a kid, I noticed people around me were behaving in ways that seemed to be a little bit insane. So I started studying sort of pop psychology when I was 13. I think I started out with Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. Went through Deepak Chopra, Anthony Robbins, Zig Ziglar, the big American names. And then I decided to get a degree in psychology. And I thought naively that the degree in psychology would be teaching me how to help people. And then I found it was actually a degree with a heavy focus on behavioralism. And you couldn't mention Freud, you couldn't mention Jung, psychoanalysis, psychotherapy. It was all, not all, but pretty much if you couldn't put a rat in a maze and distinguish what the rat was going to do, they didn't want to talk about it. So what I have a degree in psychology, but in all honesty—
From where? Where did you do that?
Aston University, Aston.
Yes. Where are you from, though, originally?
I'm from the Wirral, which is by Liverpool.
Yes. Okay, yes. Okay, so then you did that, and then where did you go from there?
From there, I was due to join the army. I was due to join Sandhurst. The night before I was going to do my final RCB to join Sandhurst, I went to a bar and I got glassed in the side of the eye. So that knocked my confidence. I asked for 6 months before I did the RCB to join as an officer, and they granted it to me. And then during those 6 months, I did some work. I met some people in Liverpool, and I got involved with the nightclub security scene in Liverpool. So for about 5 years, I was doing nightclub security, and that distracted me from the army. Whilst I was doing that, I started teaching self-defense and teaching martial arts, particularly online. And that morphed over time because I was dealing with a lot of martial arts instructors and fighters who were very, very tough in their roles, like alpha male, super masculine, tough guys. They would come to me and they'd say, like, at home, with them and their wives, with them and their kids, their girlfriends. They actually really, really struggled to assert their boundaries and to ask for what they wanted. So that became, it segued through self-defense into life coaching. And it was a sideline. It was, my main thing was self-defense. And I was teaching in schools a little bit. I don't have a PGCE. I wasn't a teacher, but I would go in and do motivational seminars and help the children with like memory skills and psychological preparation for exams and so on. But as I started exploring this for them, I recognized more and more of it in myself. Codependency, people pleaser syndrome, an inability to say no, an inability to ask for what I wanted if the situation was intimate. And when I started to speak about that on YouTube back in 2013, it really blew up. It sort of the videos went viral when I was talking about narcissism and codependency. So it started, this particular path I'm on started in 2013, really.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And you've got a very successful channel and various books, haven't you, on narcissism and BPD and various other topics. And so everyone go over and everyone go over and subscribe to Richard's channel, and he's got various books. Now, what I was really particularly interested in asking you about, I was telling you a bit about it before the show, was an old friend of mine. Mm-hmm. So to give you and the readers some background, some viewers will know that I've done a video on this particular chap as well. So I was at school with this chap, and he was very intelligent guy, a very funny guy, very witty guy, but he was a bit unusual. So, for example, we would, in the sixth form, we had to wear a suit and tie, but we'd always try and rebel against this by hiding our tie under a jumper or whatever. But he would wear a pinstripe suit always. We'd sit there in the sixth form common room reading the Sun and stuff like this. He'd make a point of reading the Guardian, and so on. He always had very left-wing opinions. I would take the kind of right-on Stuart Lee type viewpoint of the world always, and I would have conservative right-wing opinions. But these were less polarized times, I suppose, and these things didn't seem to matter as much. We stayed in touch after we left school, and then when he was at university, it seems that he went through a phase of being gay, as far as I can work out, but then went out of that phase and had a long-term girlfriend and almost married her. And he had a complete breakdown at university, dropped out of university, then went to university locally, and then was chucked out of that for not doing any work because he was depressed, and wouldn't tell his parents for weeks, and would just go into town as if he was going to university, but he wasn't. At the same time, he would steal things. It was compulsive stealing. I was in Oxford Street with him once, and we went into the shop, and he had these gloves suddenly, these new gloves. And I said, "Did you pay for those?" And he just stole them. And this was something that I noticed, not to me, but he would do this kind of thing. And then, whenever, we continued to be friends. And then when I was a postgraduate, again, we continued to be friends. And then after I finished being a postgraduate, he would, during that time, he would make little narky remarks about how he had dropped out of university with no degree, and he was pretending he had a degree. And he was getting these office jobs where, you have a degree because and he would sort of say, "Oh yeah, because when you get paid, when you get paid to do a job, you know what I mean." He would make these kind of insinuations about the fact that I was doing a doctorate and not a job, to the extent that once, when I was actually unemployed, it annoyed me. It got to me, and I confronted him about this, and then he didn't do it after that. But then subsequent to that, I would want to talk, as I would to anybody else, about the research I'm doing or whatever, and this would sort of, the slightest thing would sort of trigger him. And then he would start morally judging me and telling me how what a racist, Nazi, fascist I was, and how, I remember him once saying to me, "You'll lose, your kind of people or something will lose. Why should we be friends? How can we be friends if you think these things? Why are we friends?" And then that same evening would culminate in, and it happened many times. I remember it happened during the 2011 race riots. I triggered him by calling them race riots, by the way. He would then be crying like a girl, telling me about the problems in his life and whatever, and so on, and how I was the only person he could talk to about them. I remember that night he ended up back at my parents' house in the dining room, weeping about whatever, he'd broken up with this long-term girlfriend, and And I couldn't believe it. It was just embarrassing, you know. And this would happen again and again and again. Like I was this free therapist for him, but at the same time, he had to be unpleasant to me about my political views or that he didn't like or my research or whatever. And this would happen again and again and again. Then it went through a period where it stopped happening, and I almost broke off the friendship. But this was 2008, 2000, even at that time, that early or 9. I almost did, but I didn't. We carried on being friends, and then eventually one evening. It hadn't happened for a long time. We'd just been friends, met up, whatever. And then it did happen. I made some remark like to do with genetic similarity. He said he got on with his nephew. And I said, oh, well, it's good. You haven't got children, but, you know, it's a genetic similarity. You're indirectly passing on your genes. This triggered him, almost like a switch. Is that how you see people, he'd say. And then how blah, blah, off it would go. And that was it. I just had enough. And I just confronted him with everything I thought. I remember saying to him, you're 34, you're living with your mum, you're not married, you've got no kids, you need to grow up. And I walked out to the loo, came back, felt a bit guilty, and then he just did this, crying, and wouldn't look at me. And then that was the end of that. And then he unfriended me on Facebook, of course. And then years later, he got back in touch with me apropos of nothing on Twitter. And I said, how are you? And I just said, oh, how are you doing? Are you busy? And he said, yeah, I am busy. Yeah. Not as busy as you, not involved in far right, list, blah, 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 all this crap, right? And so then I put up on Twitter the video that I'd done about this. He saw it and commented on the video. Something like, guys, you should know that I'm the person the skit's about, and I don't normally wear a hat. I don't know why Ed is portrayed as wearing a hat, but I'd like to talk to him about this. But he's blocked me on Facebook and blocked me on Twitter, and he'll probably block me here too. So, guys, and they of course mauled him, and it was most odd behaviour, and that's the last I've had to do with him. So what the hell? What was I dealing with there?
Well, to avoid a lot of triggered comments, I'm just going to say I'm not qualified to diagnose. Even if I was a qualified clinician who could diagnose, you're not supposed to do this third hand. So for the sake of this intellectual exercise, I'm going to pretend that was a character that you've written for a book that you're writing, and you're just asking me to reflect back on what I've written in the literature about what it could be. And that'll just avoid all of because people get... That will avoid
the credentialist twats.
Yes, the credentialist twats. That will. Based on what I've read, I think sometimes it's nice to just keep it to normal layman's terms. The narcissistic framework is fundamentally compensatory, and so there's a chip on the shoulder. They have a chip on their shoulder. They're very full of shame, and in order to compensate for these intense feelings of shame, they're always trying to find a way to one-up people around them, especially if they think you have something that they want, like fame or credentials in a field or becoming a professor and so on. They would be enormously jealous of that if it's something that they felt that they deserved or something that they would benefit from by having. So compensation, tremendous amounts of envy, and a sense of a big chip on the shoulder. Now, it's not one of the diagnostic criteria for narcissism to be hyper-competitive, but I think it's so consistent and so stable and so often observed that it probably should be. These are people who will bring competition where there is no competition. They'll find a way to make it about me and you. There was another psychologist I used to speak to called Gary Klein, and he said they cannot understand horizontal relationships. They hate horizontal relationships that are equal. They can only do vertical, and they're on top and you're below. And to a narcissistic mindset, that's equal. They're on top and you're below them. So the triggering that he was claiming that he was triggered by, which he would
react.
He would, yeah. So he was genuinely triggered, but he would say, oh, it's political. It's because you're on the right and I'm on the left. But in reality, and I think you already know this, it was jealousy, raging jealousy that created the narcissistic injury that would induce a narcissistic rage. I don't think we're talking in this character that you've written for this fictional novel about a grandiose classic narcissist. I think we're talking about something much more subtle and much more difficult to deal with, which is the fragile or covert narcissist. The grandiose narcissist believes that they're special and that they deserve special treatment and that they're entitled to be in positions of power. And largely speaking, the world agrees with them, and they often get to positions of power. They're either exceptionally intelligent, exceptionally good-looking, exceptionally wealthy, alphas, if you like.
Yes, because this chap was a bit of a failure, really. I mean, but he was university dropout.
Yeah.
He did very badly in his A levels, but
Yeah.
nevertheless, he managed to get into a reasonably good university.
Yeah.
But then university dropout twice,
Yes.
and then doing a very boring job. But sorry, carry on.
So to come to you as a professor when he's failed in his...
Well, I wasn't a professor then. This is years ago, but I had a PhD anyway.
You had a PhD, and it's Durham was your PhD, right?
But my degree was Durham. Aberdeen was my PhD.
Sorry, that's right. Yeah. So he could see, like, you've been to a good red brick university, you have a PhD, you're moving towards that, and I think that was just enormously triggering for him because that's what he felt like he wanted. And in his delusional state, because we should all remember, the narcissistic framework is delusional. It's almost psychotic, which is why it vectors into borderline personality disorder. The borderline of borderline personality disorder is the border between being simply mentally ill, neurotic, to use the old language, and actually fully psychotic. So these moments that you're describing where he broke down, those were his moments of psychosis. He probably had lost temporarily his grip on reality itself, and particularly the reality of his self-image. So I think you're talking about a fragile, compensatory narcissist who's comorbid with borderline personality disorder.
So you've got the one evening that sticks in my mind it was during the riots in 2011. And we met up, and as I say, it culminated. He even beginning of the evening, slagging, it's fine. Then I don't know, I said something. He starts slagging me off about my politics, my morality, or whatever. It's like moral competing. I'm more moral than you.
Yeah.
To which I'm matched is so what? And even if you are, I don't care.
Yeah.
And then it gets back to, I remember he came back to my house, and he'd been on the radio a lot and on telly and stuff for this thing that he'd organised. And he was showing me all this. And then we start drinking more, and then he starts telling me about his relationship troubles and blah 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 blah, and then he just completely breaks down, cries. I've never seen a grown man cry like that. It was really horrible to see.
Yes.
Really, what do you do? And it happened a number of times. This same pattern across the evening. Beginning of the evening, fine. Something triggers him. Moral slag me off. Blah blah blah. Back to normal, and then crying like a girl.
So anybody in the chat who's been in a relationship with a male or female borderline will recognize that pattern, the cycling through narcissistic elation and narcissistic depletion. Also, he's put a competition in place where there was none. You were not interested in that competition, but he was insisting on it. Why morality? Because at points, I think he was switching into psychopathic mode, which, because there's narcissism, borderline, and psychopathy there, you've actually got a dark triad personality, but just a very emotionally labile one, a very fragile dark triad. The stealing that he was doing, the dropping out of university and lying about it, he's obviously intelligent enough and self-aware enough to know that this is immoral behavior. So not only are you smarter than him, you're more committed than him, you're braver than him, you're more dedicated than him, you're more moral than him because you don't steal, and you know he steals, and you know that he lies, and he has to look you in the eyes and know that his false self, his false image, which is what the narcissistic structure relies on, just falls apart and disintegrates every time you look at him.
And he also lied about, but then he confide these things into me. I mean, he didn't have to tell me that he was lying about having a degree in order to get these office jobs in London or whatever he was doing. He didn't have to tell me that.
Yeah. He
didn't have to tell me, admit that he'd stolen these pair of gloves, for example. He didn't have to, but he did.
Yes, classic for borderline.
Why would he tell me?
Because they have to overshare. There's the boundary between themselves, such as they have a self, which they don't really, and others is so thin, and they're so craving for intimacy. And he was probably desperate to be close to you, but then he's got a counter-dependent attachment strategy where, as he got closer to you, as soon as he felt the intimacy, he'd become terrified and shove you away, or begin to cry and become upset. He's oversharing. And so he'd tell you too much.
Shove me away.
Yeah.
I understand that. So he feels I have some sort of power over him,
Yes.
and he therefore resents the very person
Exactly.
that he wants to be, as it were, intimate with.
Yes.
But why does he? Why the total? I'm not talking crying. I'm talking weeping.
Yes.
Like my daughter or son has done
Yeah.
when they're very young, not
Yeah.
even now.
Ex-
What?
Because
What's that about?
This is the toxic shame that has eventually broken through. So for a classic grandiose narcissist, they bury the bodies under a patio and the patio doesn't break. For the fragile narcissist and the borderline, the patio breaks up and these rotten corpses come through, and you have calcified shame, calcified grief. I don't know what happened to him in his childhood, but it sounds like it was something quite severe, quite boundary breaking and ego destroying. And in these moments where he saw his own false self crumbling, he probably was triggered into a series of cascading emotional flashbacks where he was thinking, it's all a lie. It's all a lie. And you're the one who knows, because you've known him since he was 12. So you'll have seen him in different states. You'll have seen him change. And probably over time he got worse because it was untreated. He didn't get therapy for it. So then it's so tragic. It's so sad. Think of narcissistic behavior and narcissistic bullying as a kind of coping strategy that they become addicted to. But as they use the coping strategy, every year that goes by that they use this coping strategy, they get sicker and sicker and sicker and more doomed. And so that as they become more and more doomed, they need more of this drug, which is the coping strategy, which is narcissistic abuse. And you're basically watching somebody fall apart. And you were right to end the relationship.
I said to him, it feels almost like being a battered wife.
Yeah.
That's how I kind of felt.
Yes.
But I was sufficiently disliking change and sufficiently invested in the friendship, my best friend for a very long time, from 12 to 35.
Yeah.
I was prepared to pursue it for as long as possible, but then it just got enough. And then when I did finish it, as I said, the most extraordinary thing, we weren't in touch for 5, 6, 7, 8, 4 years. It must have been, like maybe even 5 years. And then, apropos of nothing, he gets in touch with me on Twitter.
Yeah.
And then makes these long sarcastic, passive-aggressive, mocking responses to my remarks. How are you?
Yes.
By listing all of the immoral things. How are you? Yeah, I've been busy. Not as busy as you, as you've done this thing. You know, this right-wing thing, this right-wing thing.
Yeah.
So you've been busy then? Yes, but not as busy as you. And more of them.
Yeah.
And then commented on my YouTube channel as though my followers would think he was like their mate.
Which,
most odd.
When you told me that story, I first of all, how incredibly sad. He's reaching out to you, and he really craves you particularly. It's you particularly that he wants that human connection with. He's probably terribly lonely, and he has a feeling of sort of a brotherly love feeling for you that goes back to childhood, a childhood that he is also missing and craving, but he can't just reach out in humility and say, I'm sorry about what happened, mate. It would be good to catch up, have a beer, blah, blah, blah. He has to be like, so the great Professor Dutton, the right-wing blood. He can't help himself. It's like, it's a total lack of impulse control. So we're back into the borderline psychopathy range of things. No impulse control. And yet he's driven to contact you. Then you have this fascinating element where he didn't realize he was going to be dogpiled. Of course your followers told him. He's criticizing you publicly, and it's Twitter and YouTube where people are exceptionally brutal. But there's that neurotic naivety. That's back to the narcissism thing, because really we're dealing with somebody who's probably got the emotional intelligence of a 5 to 6 year old. So that you'll see them do incredibly naive, incredibly impressionable things again and again. It's very sad.
Yes. And one thing I was going to ask about, I've heard this comment quite a lot about borderline personality. He came across, I think, as a sort of is the word cold, distant, something like that?
Yes.
Difficult to get to know, difficult to get under the skin of.
Yeah.
Although you say he overshared, and he did overshare.
Yeah.
But then on the other hand, I always got the impression that he would. You wouldn't have a serious conversation with him normally about it. It would always be jokes and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
For most of our friendship, and frankly, I liked it like that.
Yeah.
That was perfectly fine for me. He'd do funny sort of childlike things. And like one thing I remember we were sitting on the train going to Croydon actually to watch a Richard Herring play.
Oh yeah.
And we just started. This is about 1998. We were about 17 years old, and we just started back and forth, and everything we said was funny. And there was this woman in the carriage, one of those old trains with a compartment, and there was, she just burst out laughing. She couldn't help herself because it was so hilarious. And I went to his brother's wedding or wedding reception, and he ended up staying with some of my family and all this, and it was all fine. And then something went wrong. I get the impression round about a university. I mean, there was no evidence that he. So this is what just these problems tend to hit in adolescence. Is that it? Why did it go wrong then?
First of all, people who have strong narcissistic personality disorder traits. This is not the literature. This is my personal opinion. Can be very, very funny. The funniest friends I have are extremely narcissistic because I think they know how to track the reaction of an audience. They're very fast. They're very witty. Their timing is good because they know how to manipulate people's emotions. So they're good at that. Probably at university, somebody told him no where they hadn't before. This is his first taste of the real world. My God. I mean, if that's your first taste of the real world, you've been very, very well protected in life. But some people get that. They get to university and they meet a professor or a lecturer who's just like, no, you're wrong. And you're not qualified for this degree, or you're too stupid to write this essay, or there'll be some massive narcissistic injury that he endured. This is complete conjecture on my part. And maybe that's why he left.
Well, he was thrown out of university. He failed. There were two things I remember. One was that he in his second year, he moved into a flat.
Yeah.
And with people that he'd lived with in his first year. Yeah. And then they all kind of excluded him. He was the excludee.
Okay.
That's the first thing I remember. And the second thing, of course, he was chucked out. He failed his second year and was thrown out.
Massive rejection. Huge rejection then. And I just wouldn't, that personality structure that you've described doesn't have the means of dealing with that kind of rejection. So it wasn't just academic rejection, it was personal rejection. It was a double whammy. You're not smart enough, you're not strong enough, because I don't need to tell you, but for the people watching, you have to be pretty resilient to go through a degree, or at least you used to have to be. If you're extremely emotionally labile, very prone to anxiety, very prone to depression, it's hard work. It's very, very tough going through a degree. God knows what it's like doing a master's, a PhD, and so on. So he just wouldn't have had the structure in place to deal with that kind of rejection and that kind of stress. And that must have really damaged his self-image, because a part of him, he's received a message somewhere in childhood, you are special. You are a very, very special boy. You're very, very clever. You're very exceptional. I don't know who would have told, maybe his parents, maybe his school did, but he's internalized that. And it's helped him to build up this fragile.
He was intelligent. I mean, he passed his 11 plus, and but he chose to go to this Catholic school instead, and he was very intelligent.
Yeah.
But then he ballsed up his A levels. Yeah. He didn't do very well, but he was undoubtedly very intelligent. Yeah. Very good at maths, things like that. Very creative and good at art and stuff. So he was. But then he was very insecure, I think, about the social background of his family.
Right.
His parents. My parents were teachers. My friend's father was a doctor. And he'd hang around with us, and he seemed to be very self-consciously eschewing of most kids at the school were working class Catholic kind of background, right, or lower middle class, and he was always a bit different from that.
So he wanted, even at an early age, to sort of distinguish himself and put himself above other people in some way.
Yeah, a bit of a snob.
Yeah. Which is classic for someone with, even if the person isn't a narcissist, that's still a narcissistic trait. It's compensatory. You're trying to find a way to regain the upper hand through snobbery, which means you're judging people, therefore they're beneath you. And it's quite cheap. I mean, it doesn't cost you anything. You just decide that you're better than people and then have a few simple signals like the pinstripe suit or reading The Guardian. Well, that's fairly cheap. You can just, it's like the easy virtue signaling of the woke, isn't it? So I could see that early on, perhaps he started to develop narcissistic coping strategies for the deep feeling of shame. Don't know where that's come from, though. Don't know why he felt so ashamed.
See, I knew his family very well. As far as I'm concerned, his mother was lovely. They were both heavy smokers and working class people, but they were very nice, kind of working class people that these days they'd be middle class kind of thing.
Yeah.
They were from a poor background, I suppose. Nice people, friendly people, and very pleasant. So I know his father was old. His father was well over 40 when he was born. I don't know if it's something to do with poor semen quality or something. That probably does associate with narcissism and BPD. But I don't know what trauma it could. His brother, I know his brother was perfectly fine. His brother was a much more down to earth kind of person.
Yeah.
So I don't know. One thing I was going to ask about was as well is when you talk about, I always have trouble with this, a fragile sense of self. This is something they talk about, is a side of borderline personality.
Yes.
What in sort of concrete terms of everyday life, what would a person that had a fragile sense of self be like? What is that? I find that a difficult metaphor to get my head around. Fragile sense of self.
Yeah, you have my sympathy with that one. I mean, a lot of like the psychoanalytic language that then feeds into and informs personality disorder discourse, it can get a little poetic. Like what is a fragile sense? It's sort of almost mystical language. So probably the best thing, it's better to say a labile or shifting sense of self. So instead of strongly feeling as though I am this or I am that, or my political views are this, my taste in films are like this, I think that borderline struggle with a sense of emptiness and a sense that they are not. Sorry to use more poetic language, but whereas, say, a neurotypical person, whatever that may, or normal person feels themselves to be present, the borderline personality disorder person, much like somebody who has very, very strong PTSD from childhood, they don't really feel like they're there. They don't feel like a real person. They feel false. And that's why they can shift. Their morality can shift very quickly. Their politics can shift very quickly, dependent on the context. Their identity, it's constantly shifting. And it can be a good thing. They can be experimental. They can be very artistic. They can, David Bowie, who's changing his look every 6 months, the style, different characters and so on. That's well harnessed. That's like a well harnessed, labile, shifting sense of self. But for other people who don't have that creative output, it's a nightmare.
And it was so extreme with him, the neuroticism, that when on the last occasion that I met him, he developed this skin disease, or this weird calloused skin.
Yeah.
And he went to the doctor, and apparently that was a response to extreme stress.
Yeah, I can well believe it.
It was that bad.
And all these symptoms will be, I imagine, I'm not a doctor, I would think would get worse with age, because whatever it is the personality disorder that we're describing, or the personality structure that we're describing, is a way of coping with whatever the real problem is. And the real problem is, what I'm hearing is a lot of shame, and what I'm hearing is a tremendous amount of grief that's completely unprocessed. But for what? I don't know. And I'm open to the idea that, as you mentioned, like his father was 40. Yes, semen is not as high quality at that age, and that there could be a biological or a genetic component to this. It could be that. He could have been born perhaps a little less resilient.
I think he was about 43.
43?
About 43.
So...
yeah, born in the late 30s, I think. And also, I think there was this relationship, so as well, with the parents. The parent, or the father rather, was the archetypical, was a carpenter or something, archetypical working class, nice guy, but the racist, homophobic, whatever, all that. Everything.
Nice guy, but just racist and homophobic.
Well, it's true. I mean, you could, if you can't be racist and homophobic and a nice guy, then there were no nice guys born in 1900 in England at all.
Where? Which town is this from? I don't actually know which town you're from.
I don't want to. I'm from southwest London, near Wimbledon.
Oh, okay,
so that's where
that's where all
what
this
I'm
took
talking
place.
about.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I think that's fair enough, isn't it? I mean, my grandfather was homophobic and racist, but he was a nice guy. I mean, he was perfectly pleasant, and it struck me that when he died, his father, it was almost like I thought to myself, well, everything your father kind of you loved, you saying I love him and I miss him, but I thought, well, he embodies everything you hate, though, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Everything you have a go at about me, your father was.
Yes.
More so.
Yeah.
And you're now missing him, and I thought that was quite interesting.
Yeah, I mean, like, as you say, the guys of that time, I'm thinking about my grandfather and my grandfather's friends, grandfathers on both sides. Yeah, by the standards of today, absolutely, they would be considered racist and homophobic. But they were military servicemen in World War II, and they gave us the freedom we have today to even have the debate. So it is what it is.
Yeah. The other thing there was something else. Yeah, so you didn't get around. So the idea is that what you're indicating in your view, this fictional person in this story, would perhaps have some. He's overshared various things, but there is perhaps some horrible thing that happened to him that he has a sort of amnesia about, or that he just won't share, or something like that.
Well, that's the classic psychoanalytic view. From Freud and Jung, not Adler, but Freud and Jung, which would be, it's very time-based. You know, so Freud and Jung, you're kind of trapped in the past. And whatever happened in your childhood, that's determining everything for the rest of your life. With Adler, he would push back against that, challenge it. So the classic idea would be, yes, something in childhood caused the resultant personality structure, but it might not have been a thing. So if I say something terrible happened in that young man's childhood and now he has borderline personality disorder, because we watch movies and because we read books, you imagine a dramatic event. You know, he watched his mother die, or he was sexually molested by an uncle or something. But for some people, life is traumatic. Just doing as you're told is traumatic. This is what I more recently conclude, is that some people not everybody is the same. We're not all born the same, with the same capabilities and the same resilience. And for some people, just daily life can be quite tough. You said his parents were nice people, lovely people. Maybe they were. And maybe he just found it absolute hell just being raised in a home in southwest London in the 70s and 80s.
Oh, the 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
So what does it say? Well, the other thing was two other things. He had a book published, this chap, and then he seemed to very much like this. He was in the newspapers and all this, and then he tried to get another book published. It was a very good book, I have to say. It was very good. And it was rejected. All the publishers rejected it. And this seemed to very much upset him. And this was 2015. Yeah. And he hasn't published another book since.
Yes.
So it's almost like he's given up on writing books.
Yes.
Odd, because he was actually very good at it. And it happened because he wrote a blog, which was very good, which he's now taken down. And someone got in touch and said, look, we'd like to make we think your blog has the potential to be a book. So is this the giving up on things? Is this? I mean,
with the more in the realm of borderline and psychopathy, there isn't a patience there. There isn't that resilience there. There isn't the ability to take it on the chin and keep going. The psychopathic side says, I deserve this now, I want it now, and I'm not going to wait. The borderline that vectors in with the fragile narcissism says, I believe I deserve this, and other people don't. And that triggers all of the borderline responses. And when the borderline responses kick in, it's hell on earth for that person. That's where suicidal ideations, self-destructive patterns of behavior, promiscuity, alcoholism, gambling, but things get very, very, very messy once that triggers in. So he may have experienced yet another narcissistic injury. The psychopathic side of him says, I'm not going to wait. I don't have the impulse control to deal with this. And then he becomes the small, frightened, crying child that you witnessed. You've seen him. You've seen it with your own eyes multiple times. He ceases to be a man and becomes a tiny child, sobbing uncontrollably because of whatever this unexpressed, unprocessed grief is.
A creature crying in the night, a creature crying for the light, and with no language but a cry. Yes. But what does it say about me then, psychologically, that I stuck with him for so long, that I seriously contemplated abandoning the friendship in about 2008, and talked and didn't do so until 2015. What does it say? Does it say something about me? Am I deficient in some way? Why would I do that?
I've been through the same cycle as you have with your friendship there. I gave up one friendship when I was 36 and another one when I was 38, and I knew them both since the age of 12. and both highly narcissistic people. And our stories, they really do overlap in a lot of ways. And at first, I blamed myself for being a codependent people pleaser. And with time, I've looked at it and I've said, well, actually, there are positive traits here. That means that you are, unlike him, you are resilient, you are loyal. And when you've invested in something, you kind of think, well, I've already invested years of my life. I don't know, I personally, and I'm sure you're the same, don't have a ton of friends in my phone book that I can trace back to 12 years old. That's like a lifelong friend, pretty much. So it makes sense, really, to keep investing and to keep going. Logically, it makes sense to keep going. And I think it says something good, but ultimately, you, as I did, just became exhausted. I remember writing this diary entry because I felt so guilty about terminating the relationship. But what I said to myself was, look, any and all contact with this human being is becoming painful, and it's worse year on year. It's progressively getting worse. I don't have time.
I remember
for
the context. I got back. But the thing was that I was in England for a conference for the London Conference on Intelligence, actually, and because I had to get up very early the next day to get the plane, I wanted to leave the pub early. I was intent on leaving the pub by about 10, and in the end, he even after we started the argument, the blah 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 blah. He got, shall I get another drink? He would get another drink, bought me another drink. In fact, he bought a number of other drinks, and to then carry on this moral debate.
Yeah.
And I don't go, and as eventually when it finished, I got home. I remember that my mother was still up, and I explained to her what had happened, and she just said, "Well, look, no one ever said this to me before." She said, "Look, you're not good for each other. Don't see him again. Don't meet up with him again."
Which is beyond all the psychological language. Sometimes that's the best thing somebody can tell you.
But if it had been a normal evening, if I hadn't had to get up early the next day, then I think the friendship would have carried on. I think what would inevitably have happened is he would have started crying, and it would have ended on a positive sort of note. But I had to get up early the next day to get a plane, and so I left. I insisted. There was no way I was going to stay till chucking out time.
Which shows a lack of empathy for, like, he doesn't have to get up early and he's happy to keep drinking. You are the one who's going to have to get up early with a hangover, so keep taking these drinks.
Fair, I probably had to get up about the same time as him.
Yeah.
I had to get up at 7.
Right.
I don't normally do that. I normally get up about 10 or 11. And so I regard selecting being self-employed. And so I regard that as early. He probably had to get up about that time as well. But yeah, so yeah, that's what we're and now, of course, I'm very aware of such people, and I noticed them very quickly, and as I got older, and I just eschewed them. I just know straight away, no way.
Yeah, no, it's the right way.
But it doesn't get hung over, says Andrew Quinn. He takes pride. That is true. I don't get hung over as I get older because I've worked out what gets me hung over, which is things like red wine, and I don't drink it.
Yeah, no, red wine is awful. As delicious as it tastes.
Cider.
Oh God. It's trouble.
And there was this thing at university that called what was it called?
Snake bite.
Cider and black or something.
Yeah.
Horrible. It was like cider mixed with blackcurrant or something. It was
cider and black.
Anyway, no, don't drink those things. But yeah, so yeah, loyalty. So sort of K strategist versus sort of R strat, and he hasn't. I mean, So it was, as I say, this long friendship, and so you just think, what the bloody hell's going on? But yeah, I feel your examination of it fits with what I thought was going on.
Yeah.
So borderline personality, it's this. Fragile sense of self is this idea that you lack a clear, because he had quite a strong sense of identity. He seemed to have a strong sense of identity. But presumably that's a way of dealing with a fragile sense of self, that you deal with it by creating a strong sense of who you are.
Probably that was projection. It was probably the false self. So in order for a narcissistic structure to really be MPD, there has to be a false self. And that false self wouldn't change. That false self would probably be quite consistent. The Guardian reading, pinstripe suit, right on, progressive lefty was consistent. But that's his mask. He's not feeling that really. Inside, he's probably going through various states of disassociation and derealization and depersonalization, if not daily, then at least weekly, which is why he's so anxious.
So when I confront him with the data on intelligence or whatever, then that's he knows that is I am right. But it sort of triggers him because it rips down it confronts him with the falseness of his entire shell.
Exactly that.
He knows that.
Exactly that.
Right.
Yeah.
Cognitive dissonance.
Yes, cognitive dissonance. So the first level is he knows that you're right and he's wrong. But then the second level is the unconscious goes, hang on a second. If we follow this philosophical path all the way down, it's gonna lead to the conclusion that I am a series of abstractions and projections, and he would fall apart. So yeah, that's why he would become so threatened by that kind of narrative.
I see. Good. Well, we're about halfway through. So if you're new to the Jolly Heretic, I'd just like to say hello, hello, hello. Welcome to this edition of the Jolly Heretic. We are an online public house where we discuss interesting and daring science, research, and so on that is suppressed by, from what I can see, our sort of dying universities. In the same way that the coffee shops in 17th century and 18th century England were places where there were salons where people would have interesting discussions. We are a public house online that aims to do the same thing. And with us today, we have Richard Grannon, who is a psychologist, or at least he has a degree in psychology, and he does very interesting YouTube videos and books, and particularly on the subject of narcissism and borderline personality. And if you have any questions, then thank you. It is a nice analogy, Mr. Quinn. Thank you very much. Then if you have any questions that are on these areas, then please do send them in, and we will, of course, answer them today. You can see the link on the screen. That's where you can send them into Entropy, and you can also send them in via YouTube. Okay, so we have a number of questions. So first of all, from hang on a sec. Oh, come on. All right. Yes, good. So Yehuda Finkelstein says, Mr. Grannon, does Donald Trump bear all the hallmarks of a narcissist?
Yes. This became within the diagnostic and statistical manual world, the American Psychiatric Association world. This became a bit of an argument because I can't remember the chap's name. They have these councils for the different personality disorders, and for narcissistic personality disorder, there was a sort of a group of 20 who did the research for it and put the personality disorder together. And whoever headed that research group, I can't remember the chap's name, he came out and said that actually Donald Trump definitely doesn't have narcissistic personality disorder, even though in an unprecedented move, a bunch of members of the American Psychiatric Association got together and broke the rules and wrote this letter and said, this man shouldn't be president. We all believe he has narcissistic personality disorder. This chap from the APA came forward and said he definitely doesn't, because NPD is maladaptive. And it means it must hurt other people, but it must also hurt the individual for it to be a personality disorder. And Donald Trump is doing very well and he feels fine. So therefore, he can't have NPD. That's the guy who's working for the APA. I would say if Donald Trump isn't heavily close to being a grandiose narcissist, then the diagnosis is meaningless because he ticks every single one of the 9 traits. I like him, but he probably is mad.
Mad?
As a hatter.
You think so?
Yes.
Mad as a hatter. Okay.
But perfectly mad for that mad country. He's probably one of the better presidents they had, because they need a narcissistic psychopath in control in the colonies.
Well, in general, according to research by Kevin Dutton, no relation, psychopaths tend to do very, very well for themselves. Well, they don't do well for themselves, but if they have enough intelligence, then it's that is what will propel them to the top, particularly in business.
Yes,
and that's what Donald Trump, and to a lesser extent, politics, and that's what Donald Trump's thing is.
Yeah,
and so it would make a great deal of a great deal of sense. And there was research by somebody called Felix Post, and he found that evidence of psychopathology, which crosses over with narcissism, is very substantial among what he called great men. He did an analysis of, I forget how many it was, great men, based on various markers of their lives, their sexual behavior, whatever. And he came to the conclusion, that they were hugely overrepresented psychopathology. So I hope that answers the question, Mr. Finkelstein. The next question is, Mr. Grannon, isn't narcissism unstoppable as a societal problem with the spread of social media like TikTok or Instagram? Is there any research that indicates that narcissism is higher among young people due to their social media addiction? So separate questions there. Do you think that social media augments narcissism in some way or imbricates it? And do you think that young people might be higher in it?
It absolutely facilitates, augments, and increases the narcissistic trait in people. I mean, the very fuel of social media is narcissism. If you took narcissism out of the current social media platforms, they would completely collapse. Facebook, the big ones. So Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. If you said, right, no narcissistic supply can be drawn from these platforms, you can only make posts that are informative or educational, but you're not in them. You cannot draw narcissistic supply. They would crash. They would completely crash. And absolutely, they make people worse because they they deliberately make people addicted to the serotonin hit that they get. Where are they getting the serotonin from? Narcissistic supply. So everybody who's extraordinarily active and dependent for their moods on social media is effectively narcissistic to some degree. But it's not, let me be clear, that's not clinical narcissistic personality disorder. There's a controversial diagnosis within psychiatry called context-specific narcissistic personality disorder. You become a rock star overnight, you win the lottery, you become NPD. You are no longer a rock star, you lose all your money, and you go back to being where you were before. It's controversial because it makes personality disorder seem context-specific, and some people really, really don't like that. They'd rather it was permanent.
Dr. David Steele, who was, you may recall, Foreign Secretary in the 70s and then set up the Social Democrat Party. And he's got this idea of the people that are in power for a long time basically go a bit mad.
Yeah.
And they kind of become narcissistic. It's called, he calls it hubris syndrome.
Right.
So he argues Thatcher and Blair are classic examples of people that were in power for a very long time. They're being told they're brilliant all the time.
Yes.
So that even if they weren't narcissists when they went in, then they kind of are when they come out.
Well, it's not controversial to me. That makes sense. What do you think of that as a? I mean, does that make sense?
It seems to make well. You'd have to do research on the nature of their brains and stuff, wouldn't you? And so it's a bit difficult to other than speculate. But it makes a great deal of sense to me.
Yes.
And then this has been applied to Putin, and it's been suggested. Well, look, it's a similar thing. He's been in power for a very long time, and you just become drunk on people telling you, but not the constant indications to you that you are brilliant.
Yes.
And
How could it not warp a human being's perspective? I mean, in order to maintain perspective, we need humility, we need grounding. And that question asked, is there any way to reverse the effects of narcissism society? In my benevolent dictatorship, which is coming soon, all that social media will be banned. That's the only way out.
What they shouldn't be allowed to do is say things like, I am honored to announce that we've had this paper published in this journal or whatever. No, you're not honored to announce it. You're boasting. Yeah. You're bragging. Yeah. That's what you're doing. So why don't you just say, as I would do, I just say, I've had this interesting paper published in this journal. Yeah. I'm upfront about it.
Yeah.
But no, you get these people, these left-wing people. I'm honored to announce it, they say.
Humble bragging and covert posturing.
It's
dreadful.
I'm honored. You're honored. I'm honored to brag to you about what I have done. Okay.
And you're honored to listen.
You are, yeah. So you think that young people are more narcissistic, and do you think that this is because they've been brought up in a world of social media and stuff like this?
There isn't really strong research that I've seen yet that indicates that digital natives are more narcissistic, but it's coming. Well, as the research progresses and continues, that we have to see this. We'll have to see a correlation between digital natives and an increase in narcissism. We can say that there is indications that they have more borderline traits, that they have more body dysmorphia, that they have that more fragile sense of self and are a little bit more anxious and a little bit more prone to depression. There is research that indicates that. But for some reason, the research done so far, they keep saying, no, there's no indicators here that this creates narcissism. Could be a cover-up.
One thing is that they're brought up in this kind of female education system. Was the best, whereas when we were brought up, and particularly when our parents were brought up, you're brought up in a system that is group-oriented. And the idea is to basically be broken like a horse. Into being through, being beaten and things, into being selfless, and all kinds of methods were done to do that, to make you a productive and loyal member of the herd. And those things have gone. And now it's all about, how do you feel, and all this, rather than stiff upper lip, shut up, or you get the cane.
Absolutely, which was
I think
I was brought up in private schools. I was lucky to be in private schools. I was lucky, I see now, to be in boarding school, especially as I see the way the world has gone, where, as you say, it's collectivist. So I don't matter. Grannon doesn't matter. Oh, Grannon's sad today, or Grannon. Nobody gave a shit if I was sad. They would just say, shut up and do your work. Obviously, we don't want to create tyrannical, brutal systems in which children are traumatized, but there is a trauma that can come from mollycoddling kids too much as well. And I think we're seeing that now. We're really hamstringing the ability of these kids to grow up into young adults and to cope with the world.
The idea of saying to one of these people of 20 or whatever, you don't matter and you're not important. They'd find that amazing. Why me? Why not you? This would be incredible to them. But that is how people of, certainly my parents and grandparents' generation, and to a lesser extent even my generation, were brought up. And it seems to be that young people, that's not the case. So that they are raised to believe that they matter, that they're important, that their feelings matter, and that I'm offended. All this, that term offended, and that coming in. I remember in the early 90s, this thing about how they say on the news, and this reportage may include images that some viewers may find distressing. Now, prior to that, some viewers may find it distressing. So what? Live with it.
It still happened. If you're a bit of a pussy, it still happened. Not our problem. If you may have an emotional response to reality, I think that's your issue, not reality's issue.
That means that you haven't learned to control your feelings well enough. That's what that means. So that's your problem. And that's my attitude towards this whole alphabet debate. I think it's taking the view that you've got borderline personality disorder. That's why you believe you are something you're not. And you should go to a psychiatric institution until you don't have it anymore.
You should seek therapy.
You need therapy to get rid of it. Some viewers, it's commenting something called New Adam. Some viewers may find it interesting. I even watched it in the late 90s. This documentary, it contains extreme views, it said, which some viewers may find.
Opinions will be cited that you don't agree with. Brace yourself.
Well, there was something recently that Simon Webb, the historian, was talking about the New Statesman cited his video, and someone said underneath this, "Can you tell me what it was about?" Obviously, I don't want to watch it. Which I thought was fascinating, because the idea that I don't want to watch it because that could trigger me and upset me.
Can you just tell me? Can you tell me what will be in the video before I watch it, so I know what I'm going to get when I watch it? It's absolutely pathetic.
So I know that I'm not going to be upset by it. I mean, absolutely. I mean, how can you enjoy drama or whatever if you're war? I watched this with I was watching something called Squid Games. On Netflix, and it actually said before it in Finnish. It said in the corner. It said something. It said. It said the word itsemurha, which means suicide. So that was telling me that somebody in it was going to kill themselves. Now, in so much as I won't give away the plot, but the nature of the plot was such that told me, that ruined the ending, basically. So the fact that was there meant the ending was not a surprise. It was appalling.
Well, the message is so much more important than you being entertained, though, isn't it? It's true of everything that is produced from entertainment now. It's all about the message. Entertainment is a distant second.
Well, because it's not. If it's not realistic, if you're going to do something that is fantasy, then the way that works works is that every other element of it is scrupulously realistic. Otherwise, belief cannot be suspended.
Yes.
So a comedy. So if you're going to have like black people that are judges or whatever, then it's not going to work, is it? But anyway, look, moving on. The next question comes from did that one. Yes. Mark Zia says, you diagnosed Trump with narcissistic personality disorder prior to his election. Can you give us an update on his progression?
Well, he seems pretty stable. He's the same. He hasn't really changed. He's the same chap as he was before. So his progression, I don't know. I mean, he's got more robust support. So if it's NPD, I'm sure he's feeling quite a high degree of narcissistic elation now, because since they got him out, there's an awful lot of people, even people who voted Biden in, who want him back and will be voting for him in 2024 without a doubt. So I would think he'd feel pretty good right now.
Okay. The next question comes from Professor Spud, and he says, I'm curious about your observations as to the correlation between political... is this me or... it's for you, yeah. Between political orientation and dark triad traits, which are associated with being woke versus being on the dissident right.
Yeah. As far as... we haven't touched on woke much. I'm at a point now when it comes to woke ideology that I don't actually even believe that these people have political beliefs. I think it's all posturing and pretty much all a manifestation of personal problem. I mean, even the Marxist feminists even wrote the political is personal and the personal is political. And now that's literally being expressed. Their individual personal traumas are being expressed as their political views. So they're not really political views. They're not... With this type of personality disorder and with the woke brigade, you're never really talking about what you think you're talking about. You're never really saving the whales. What you're really doing is look at me, look at me, look at me, I matter. Or look at me, I'm very angry with my daddy, or I'm very angry with my mummy. These are not, it's not, I think that we should do more to give them less credit. We should listen to them less. And we used to treat extreme radical leftists as fringe nutters. I don't know why we've stopped doing that. Why don't we just go back to
because they've taken over society? That's why.
Yeah.
Because that's why we don't do it, because they are now the mainstream. I mean, that was the attitude under Franco's regime, that these people were mad. I was going to add something. Oh yeah, my understanding is that yes, the people that are on the far left are this is in the context in which people are narcissistic and Machiavellian. Yeah. And that's because if you're in the current context, you get power by being leftist and signaling and so forth. Yes. And you get people praising you and saying you're great through those same mechanisms. And people that are high in psychopathology are attracted to danger, attracted to that's where they thrive. Yeah. And so they tend to be attracted to the dissident right. Yes. And so that's why the dissident right. And I think that there may be something inherent in being left-wing, that you're neurotic as well, that you're mentally unstable, that you want power over people, and therefore but you're weak, and so you virtue signal power, and that's what leftism is about, virtue signaling. Whereas right-wing people are more literally more powerful, physically more powerful. If we on average,
if we reduced politics to and forced narcissism on top of it, which is pretty awkward and pretty ugly, the left is covert fragile narcissism and the right is grandiose classic narcissism. So the left feels like they should have power, but nobody agrees with them. So it's kind of as you just said, it's sort of a loserish mentality. We're below and we want to be above. That's why in order to be left-wing, you have to be revolutionary. It's a revolutionary. If we look at if we're talking in terms of where left and right wing comes from the French Revolution, you're pro-revolution. You want to tear things down. If you're on the right, you're sitting pretty. You've won in inverted commas, and you like it there. So that's grandiose narcissism. And you say, no, I think I'm wonderful, and people generally agree with me, and the establishment agrees with me. So here I am. It's interesting what you said about.
What if you're on the right and the left are in power?
If you're on the right and the left are in power, then you would be in the position of being the loser for that moment, wouldn't you? So then you would go into, if it's a bit ugly to do this, it's not right to do, I'm forcing narcissism onto it. You would be in narcissistic injury. and then you would go into.
So you go into a big rage.
You go into a big rage. You go into a rage. Yeah.
I see. Okay, so I got you. Okay, the next question comes from Professor Spud, and he says, I did that one. I'm sorry. From Bourgeois, and he says, question for Grannon, when are you going to hook Dutton up with your main man, Sam Vaknin? A Dutton-Vaknin duo would truly align the stars.
Whenever Mr. Dutton would like to do so, that would be a really fascinating conversation. Would you be interested in speaking to Sam?
Yeah, I could have him on in June sometime. June?
Yeah,
let's do that.
I'll reach out to Sam and suggest that, because
cool.
it would be.
I did a video on. Oh my God, where's my list of? Where's my? Oh my God, I can't find my list of engagements. It must be around somewhere. But just a sec. Yes, I think that I put the list somewhere stupid. I do have a list of future engagements, and I'm quite concerned that if I put it in the bin, which would be awful.
That would be awful.
I don't know why it's not in its normal place. It must have fallen down or something. But anyway, yes. So yeah, I did a video actually a while ago about Vaknin's views on narcissism and stuff like that. So yeah, we could. I would certainly be interested in having him on. Here it is. Yeah. Here we go. Yeah. So we could do mid June. Okay. So the next question comes. Margaret ate it, says coughing. No. Margaret. No, she's too busy licking her fur balls and coughing them up at the moment to do that. Okay, the next question comes from Mark Ziad. He said, Mr. Grannon, in your opinion, is there a genetic predisposition to physical disorders like schizophrenia or personality, to psychological disorders, I think you mean, like schizophrenia or personality disorders? When
I was at university and I was brainwashed into radical leftism, I found the very idea completely abhorrent and possibly racist. Nowadays, a bit older now, I think it would be really strange if there was no genetic component. It would be odd. If we said conclusively, because I don't even know how we don't have the technology, we don't have the equipment to measure that. But if we did, and we said, no, it's really strange, there's no genetic, or we do.
Yeah, sorry, I can just answer this question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Schizophrenia is strongly heritable. And my reading is that it's between 0.6 and 0.8 heritable. So it's about as heritable as intelligence. As for personality disorders, something like 0.5. So, I mean, we have got data on it from twins. So we do know. The next question comes from Hibernian Perspective, and he says, one for Ragnar Grannon the Based. Thank you very much. Thank you, sir. Thank you. This is my Irish correspondent. Thank you very much, sir. Artesian Farmer says, are narcissists aware that they are narcissists, or are they honestly not seeing it even when confronted?
I think it's highly likely that they know that they're narcissists. I think one of the recent tests for narcissism that came out, I think it was in 2016, I want to say it was the University of Minnesota, they basically described to people what the traits of narcissism were, and then said, does this sound like you? And if they said yes or no, and then they gave them one of the classical tests for narcissism, they said that was just as good as a classical test for narcissism. So you just basically say to the person, this is what narcissists believe. Would you largely agree that sounds like you, or largely not? And they would say yes or no. So yeah, they know that they're entitled. They know that they have a false sense of self, that they're envious.
Do you think that would there be a difference in that knowledge between the covert and the grandiose type?
Yes, I think because of the shame, a covert or fragile narcissist. This is my opinion. This is not based on research. You should ask Sam about this. This would be a great question for Sam.
Okay.
I would suspect that they would be more predisposed to not lie, but to be dismissive. And because they're so emotionally dysregulated, they create confabulations, and so they genuinely become confused. So they might really not know how bad they're being.
Talking about confusion, I forgot to ask about this with regard to this chap that we talked about earlier from my school days and so on. He went through a phase of being gay, of basically being bisexual.
Yeah.
And my understanding is that itself certainly correlates with psychopathic personality, bisexuality. Does sexual confusion come into narcissism or borderline personality?
Sorry, I just realized the mistake I made. You mentioned twins, and I started thinking Minnesota. The university was Michigan who came up with that test. 2 M's. It could be. It could be. I mean, I know it's definitely been suggested in some of the literature, for sure that it has. It's not something that I particularly have ever specialized in, because I tend to think of sexuality as being more learned and more culturally based. There's a good book by Douglas Murray, who's gay, The Madness of Crowds, and he goes into that. And actually, he presented a pretty strong argument that no, there's a good chance that it's biological. So I have an open mind on it. Where my leaning is towards thinking maybe some trauma, maybe some training, maybe some cultural elements form people's sexuality, and that I think that human sexuality is quite plastic. I think it can move depending on the context.
The heritability is quite low. It's 0.4 for men and 0.2 for women. So for women particularly, it's quite plastic.
I shouldn't. I want to do this on the interview I do with you, but there's 2 questions that I want to ask you, and I think for the people who are following me, who are watching you now, when you say 0.2, 0.4, 0.6, could you just quickly explain for people what that means?
Well, 0.1 is it's 100% to do with genes.
Okay.
So 100% of the variance is genes.
Yeah.
So 0.5, half the variance is genes.
Okay.
So that's what it means.
The second
half genes, half environment would be 0.5.
The second thing is, and this came up when you did the talk in London. We both spoke about collectivism before, and that's confusing for people because they generally think that on the right it's individualist and on the left it's collectivist, but you're using these terms not politically but psychologically. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. And I'm saying that the right is collectivist in the sense that right-wing people are interested in the good of the group.
Yeah.
They're interested in subsuming themselves, saying, I'm not important, I want to do what's good for my group.
Yeah.
Whereas people on the left are selfish people that want to do what's good for them. But one of the ways that they do that is by going on and on and on about how group-focused and group-oriented they are. And so then ironically, you get this paradox whereby it is the left that will seem, the individual leftist will seem like he's way more interested in the group than the individual right, because he'll go on about it, but he'll do that as a compensatory mechanism for the fact that he's doing that in order to get status for himself.
Right.
Whereas the right-wing person doesn't need to go on about it as much, but actually he's acting in the interests of the group. So it's this interesting paradox. I think it's very interesting. It's like the way that, I don't know, if you ever noticed that a person that is upper class might have a less posh accent than a person's upper middle class, because the upper middle class person will overcompensate.
That's a really good way of thinking about it, actually, yeah.
So you've got the Hyacinth Bouquet type, who actually isn't that higher class at all, and she ends up with a posher voice. Anyway, look, I want to move on to the next question.
Sorry, yeah.
Which is from Artisan Fowler, and he says, "Are narcissists?" And we've done that one. That's the. Jimmy Goodman says, "Any link between naturally unique eyebrows and higher narcissism?"
I have no idea. No idea.
Naturally unique eyebrows.
I don't even know what that means. I have no idea.
I even know. Do you mean like a monobrow? a monobrow? You mean a monobrow?
I have no idea what that means.
If he means a monobrow, I mean, if in so much as there might be a relationship between narcissism and testosterone, suppose there could be, but I'm not aware it's been tested. But I tell you what, I'm going to look into that. I bet there's data on people having hair here.
It's very impressive.
I'm sure it's going to correlate.
You always know what's heritable and to what degree it's heritable. Is that standard within evolutionary psychology, or is that your particular interest, heritability of traits? Well, evolutionary psychology is massively about heritability anyway, but because it's evolution, and so evolution is to do with heritable traits. But we're interested in that, and I've got a good memory, and so I'm able to learn off by heart. And it's pretty cool.
I mean, if you don't know the answer, it's normally 0.5.
Right.
That's the stat, like half. It's normally about half.
Right.
But there's some things that have a very low heritability, sexuality, for example, and some things have a very high heritability, like how many legs you have.
Yeah.
Heritability of 1. The next question comes from this is a question from Hibernian Perspective, $25. Thank you very much indeed, sir. And he says, I take it this is for our guest. Radical libertarians shut down concern for demographic change and the attendant enrichment of vulnerable young women in Europe by remarking, "Do you actually know anyone affected? What is the psychology behind the weaponizing of diversity by the left and the accommodation of the same by the centre who want it to happen?"
That was a long sentence. I was boxing this morning. I can't remember the beginning of that sentence. My intelligence has been
Radical
punched out.
libertarians shut down concern for demographic change.
Yeah.
And the attendant enrichment of vulnerable young women in Europe.
Yeah.
You know what that means.
Yeah.
By remarking, "Do you actually know anyone affected? What is the psychology behind the weaponizing of diversity by the left and the accommodation of the same by the centre who let it happen?"
I think the psychology is they, on the left, weaponizing diversity is probably fairly superficial. They just know that in this cultural moment, that it won't be resisted. It can't be resisted. In this cultural moment, for whatever reason, the time we live in, it's become verboten. It's absolutely haram to speak out against it. So that means it's like a knife that can cut through into any subject. You can do anything in the name of diversity. My God, everything is done in the name of diversity. Banking, swimming, everything is done in the name of diversity. And you cannot stand against it, because if you do, you're a pariah. People in the centre who've allowed it, the psychology of that is fairly simple. Centrists are probably, psychologically speaking, they're going to be peacekeeper, they're going to be balanced, they're going to be trying to keep everything in equilibrium. That's what being in the centre is, and they're probably very agreeable. What would you say about that, Mr. Dutton?
Yeah, weak. They're weak.
Okay.
Culturally,
we're weak, and the centre is weak.
Weak. The next question comes from Cormac, and he says, "Isn't it dangerous when a narcissist finally gets found out as a failure in life? They can become homicidal. See Chandler Henderson trial in the US."
That would be somebody who is a narcissistic psychopath. Psychopaths are dangerous because they will break the law. Narcissists, according to the research I've read, generally don't. They generally don't cross that legal boundary, and they're very concerned for their public image. Once laws are broken, you are talking psychopathy.
Yeah, there was a case in America, as I recall, of this chap that managed to get away for years with this huge lie that he'd got into medical school and all this stuff, and then it got to the point where the wife rang up the medical school just to check about their accommodation or something like that, and they said, "No, we have no record of this person here." and this had been going on for about 5 years.
Oh wow!
And then so obviously he had her murdered.
Oh, well, what else could he do?
Yeah. Okay, the next question comes from Thomas, and he says, "What would a genuinely right-wing society?" I think that's more a question for me, Thomas, rather than for our guest. So I'll move on from that. I'll do that on Monday. Aryan Seacrest, what if you actually are grand? Wouldn't grandiose narcissism be proper modesty? Be proper. Immodesty in a genius is hypocrisy.
Immodesty in a genius is...
Immodesty, he's saying, what if you actually are brilliant?
Yeah.
It would be hypocritical for you to be modest. Modesty in a genius would be hypocrisy.
I'm not sure that modesty in a genius is hypocrisy. That sounds like a contrarian position to adopt. But if you are actually amazing, it's not narcissism. You're not suffering from delusions of grandeur. You are grand. So if you are an amazing genius and you think you're an amazing genius, well, then your thoughts and the reality are aligned, and we call that sanity. But I'm not sure I could agree that quite if you are a genius, Mr. Dutton, and you choose to be modest, calling that hypocrisy would be, I don't know. It's uncharitable.
I'm also not sure it works, because people that are geniuses, yeah, okay, perhaps they are moderately low in agreeableness and moderately low in conscientiousness.
Yeah.
So that would militate in favor of them having perhaps quite high self-esteem and a sense of their own importance. But on the other hand, they do have neurotic traits,
Yes.
which would militate in favor of self-doubt, and that would also act as a motivator towards desiring to make sense of a chaotic world, which would be part of the genius. So I'm not sure how many geniuses would see themselves as brilliant.
Yes.
And also, I guess once you are, as the gentleman says, brilliant, you're hanging around with other people that are brilliant.
Yeah.
And so, therefore, your level of brilliance is relative, isn't it? I mean, you're hanging around. Maybe this was the problem for my this chap. This is a former friend of mine that we talked about earlier. That he was the dog's bollocks at school. I mean, very few people were cleverer than him or whatever. You know. And then suddenly he goes to quite a reasonably good university, and he's surrounded by people that are more intelligent than him.
I heard about cases of that at Oxford. So my school sent people to Oxford, and then we would hear these stories of people, you know, leaving or hurting themselves or making a scene or something. And often it was, thank you, it was because of that. They were amazing at school. They would be in the local newspapers, and they go to Oxford, and you know, it's 10 a penny there. Everybody's brilliant there, so you're nothing anymore. Massive narcissistic injury.
Yeah, you're suddenly you've gone from being a big fish in a small pond. Well, yeah. So it's I don't know how relevant that was, but that could have been germane as well. Okay, I do like the word germane. Okay, the next question comes from Jean Dertal, and he says, Mr. Grannon, any evidence for learned madness, folie à deux, explained nutty leftist behaviour made worse by the internet?
Well, folie à deux is strictly a dyad where there is a shared delusion. And usually, I think, in the cases of folie à deux that I looked at, that they were both emotionally unstable people to begin with. But if what you're saying, could it be contagious? Absolutely, it's contagious. I mean, these ideologies are madness-making. I mean, they're anti-science, anti-reality, anti-history, anti-geography, anti-culture. And if you drink deeply from that well, you will become poisoned. These are, it's almost like ideological parasites, whatever Gad Saad calls them, mind viruses, they seem to function like. So yeah, absolutely, you can get very, very sick that way.
There was a case in the UK many years, about 10 years ago, of these Swedish female twins.
Yes.
And they went mad and started stabbing people and running into a motorway.
That's right.
And it came to trial, and the psychologist said folie à deux.
Yeah.
And the judge said, well, what does this mean? They're not guilty because of the folie à deux.
Yeah.
And we can never know if they'll do it again.
Yeah. A completely insane
and the judge
judgment.
It's just not good enough.
Yeah.
What you're saying, we have to release these people. You can.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's no treatment. And no.
Did you see the video of the girl getting run over by a truck?
Is this the same case?
It's the same case. There's actual video of them being run over.
I did see the video, but I saw a documentary about it where they dramatised it.
Incredible.
And they ran onto the M3 or something.
Yeah.
I don't know what, something like that. And it's just insane.
Yeah, she was run over by a truck and then ran away. Incredible footage.
That's right. Yeah, she was hit by a truck and got up and ran away. She's in this state. And then it's the sister as well. And it was just...
It's Viking DNA. They were berserkers.
I think so. The next question comes from Baron Mordipar, and he says, does Mr. Grannon consider Americans who voted for Joe Biden were naive or mentally ill? Don't they realize Joe and his son are crooks and Democrats can't deliver free stuff forever?
Sounds like a trap of a question. I don't know how anyone could have voted for Joe Biden with a straight face. I was against Trump, but I could see why people did that. I do not know why people voted for Biden. I mean, it's gone exactly the way I thought it would go. In fact, he's probably doing a little better than I thought he was going to do. So, yeah, I'm not going to go so far as to say that they're insane, but I do not understand how people who consider themselves Democrats could possibly vote for Joe Biden, have voted for Joe Biden.
Okay. A question from Thomas. I think this does relate to a conversation we were having. He says, what would a genuinely right-wing society actually look like? Not a neocon, but a monarchist authoritarian type. Would people just switch to virtue signaling towards the right? Any profound changes? Yeah, this brings into the idea that the woke people that, what's his name, said with the new church ladies, if you get a group-oriented society, then surely wouldn't you expect narcissistic Machiavellian types to just religion signal?
Yes.
And then they will. That's why they could so easily switch from being Nazis in East Germany to being communists.
Yes, 100%. 100%. They would just virtue signal that they are now of. They'll go with anything wherever the power is. I think you've made this point really, really well, backed with evolutionary psychology. These are Machiavellian people who will go where the power is. They don't really have a political ideology. They're just power hungry. And at the moment, it's woke. But if in 10 years' time, or less, as it's likely to be, it's something far more right-wing and conservative, they'll switch. They'll switch overnight. I absolutely believe that.
Yeah, Jim Goad. The current thing, as Andrew Quinn is saying, precisely, and you can see it so beautifully in the switch that happened recently, that you can go from saying there should be no borders, nationalism is bad, racism is bad. We want to signal our support for a society that is extremely racist by any measure.
Yep.
And separate countries, separate borders. Borders most certainly are important.
Yep.
Right. And to be able to do that is unbelievably inconsistent.
And how long did it take them? It was a matter of a week or maybe 2 weeks, and they went, yes, okay, we're all for violence, we're all for nationalism, we're all for a country that has the Azov battalion who are open neo-Nazis, rah, 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 let's go. Facebook even changed its policies to say, yes, you can now support neo-Nazis as long as they're killing Russians because they're this week's bad guy. Incredible.
What do you mean it said you could support neo-Nazis? I don't understand.
Yeah, there's been 2 Facebook policy changes that actually permit the support of neo-Nazis. This was reported in the news. You can openly support neo-Nazis as long as they are fighting Russians. So if you want to say the Azov battalion did great, they're doing a good thing by killing all these Russians, that's permitted on Facebook now. That's an official policy change.
As long as it's the Azov battalion, then that's all right.
Yes, it's okay.
I mean, so that just shows you that just the despicable, vile Machiavellianism and lack of principle and of these people. And I suppose the average person is just a sort of a miniature version of that. That they will like the Queen in the Queen of Hearts. Now it's in Wonderland. That they'll think this thing this morning, and then somebody else will say something a bit different, and I'll think that now. I'll think that with that. So they're hollow. That's a fragile self, isn't it? But the average person is like that, so that can't be a fragile self. That's just labile, adaptive thing to be.
You know what? Instead of saying a false sense of self, I'm going to start saying hollow. I think that's better. That's actually better. There's just nothing in there. So they'll get. That's why they're for these social justice movements. That's why they want to join a crowd and join a mob and join a movement, because they don't. There's nothing in them. They are hollow people. That's actually much better than saying a fragile sense of self, because I think it points much closer to the heart of the matter. These are hollow people. But as you said, yes, everybody's hollow, so it's worrying.
Yeah, but these people are extreme, though. These people are hollow plus mental health problems and whatever. So it's a little bit different. But the average, I don't know if the average person does it, but the average, it's just unbelievable the way you can go through it. You can see it on Facebook. Pray for Paris. You go. The only things you can see on a random person's Facebook profile, if you're not their friends, are normally all of their profile pictures.
Yes,
and you can go. There's the French flag. There's the Belgian flag.
I support the current thing.
Yeah, I support the. I've had. I'll get your COVID jab.
Yeah.
And I've had it. I'm here. And then whatever. Yeah.
I posted on it.
Okay.
I posted on Instagram a story that said that there was a Ukrainian doctor that was saying that he told all of his doctors if they caught a Russian prisoner of war to emasculate them, to castrate them. I don't know whether the story is true or not. It was reported in the news. I put it there. And all the same people who were saying you must wear a mask to save your grandma's life were the same people saying, good, cut Russian soldiers' balls off. And I was like, you want to break the Geneva Convention and mutilate people because this is how you feel this week. This is how you've been propagandized to emotionally respond this week. It's completely insane. Sorry for interjecting with that.
I've had 2 more questions. I want to wrap up after this, so don't send any more. Hibernian Perspective says, psychology of my boss, a big fish in a small pond. He acts like a man's man, but does a safe office job where he pushes his weight around. Why would a gym bruh who smokes and acts the hard lad take a soft job mainly done by women? Is he a fragile narcissist?
I don't know. It sounds like the false self that he's projecting is not matched by his lifestyle choices. I don't know whether that is narcissism, but he certainly sounds like a bit of a wanker.
Okay, 2 more questions. Harmony Sombra says, hi, is there a recent uptick in self-diagnosis and over-pathologizing, like a tendency to overuse terms like narcissist, psychopath, crazy, BPD?
Yes, absolutely, because people like me go on YouTube and popularize psychological terms in a way that seems accessible and entertaining. And then people who are not that bright think that they have a degree in psychology, start using it and virtue signal with it. Leftists, radical leftists particularly, love psychobabble. They love psychological language. And I really regret now ever being a part of this movement. Sorry, I'm not part of a radical leftist movement.
You said, I remember I watched a video of yours, and you said that they narcissists love word salad.
Yes.
The way they can, they can sort of get around you and manipulate you and seem clever. Aryan Seacrest says, runaway slaves had a mental illness. Gays did until the 70s. Today, trans people do, but only for health insurance purposes. Doesn't mental health discourse just launder moral political conflict?
Does mental health discourse launder moral political conflict? That sounds like a great title for a dissertation. Yes. I mean, often. There's a whole conversation that needs to be had. I mean, we could probably do an hour and a half on that one topic. The many crimes and missteps of psychology over the last 120 years. There's just no doubting it.
Okay, Thomas says, thank you for answering. I am suffering the big fish in a small pond moment. How does one deal with that?
It's great to be a big fish in a small pond. What are you suffering from, Thomas?
I think he's doing the transfer. Maybe he realizes that he's going to soon be a small fish in a big pond.
Oh, humility. Just keep a sense of humor. Remember, you're just a silly little human and we'll all be dead one day.
Excellent. All right, good. Excellent. Okay, well, I think I'm going to wrap up now. So I'd like to thank Richard for coming on. It's been a jolly interesting conversation.
Thank you for having me.
And if you go to subscribe to his channel. Oh, someone asked me, are you doing any in-person stuff? Any meet and greets in London or anywhere like that?
Yes, I will.
At any point?
I will. Please join the mailing list on my website. Follow me on YouTube and I will announce it 2 weeks in advance. And we'll do something in London and something in Liverpool, certainly.
Okay, great. All right, good. So I'd like to thank you for coming on, and please subscribe to his channel and buy his books and all that stuff. And I've got a number of questions which I'll look at on Monday. I will see you on Monday. This will now go on BitChute and Odyssey. And goodbye.
Thank you.